Welcome to the second day of the NDA Stakeholder Summit. I'm Bill Hamilton, I'm Head of Stakeholder Relations, and I'm doing the MC bit this morning. So I know there are one or two people who weren't here yesterday, so just to repeat the kind of safety information, there are no alarms planned, so if alarms do go off, it's real, and the fire exits are behind me to my left and my right, and the muster point's at the rear of the car park. So that's that. I think we had a good day yesterday. Really interesting questions. At the final session today, we've got, I think, an interesting panel and a Q&A at that point. But what I'll do for the speakers in this first session before the break, once each speaker has finished, I will give you the chance, if anybody's got a burning question or point that they want to make, we'll get people to do that. We won't have a half-hour Q&A. We haven't got the time, but I will allow people to ask that burning question if you want to do that. So that's that. So without more ado, I'll ask Andrew van der Lem, who's the Head of Government Relations and Socio-Economics at the NDA. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to just talk about three things that are very close to my heart. The first thing, I'm going to talk about myself. The second is the socio-economic impact of the NDA's activities of nuclear decommissioning across the various sites. And the last thing is I'm going to talk about children's toys. So I hope that will keep your interest for about 10 minutes. Just moving on to the first element, me, who am I? So I joined the NDA almost 2 years ago now as their head of government relations. I'm an economist and civil servant by background. And I was brought in to help manage the very complex relationship that the NDA has with government. The NDA across the board spends about £3 billion a year, and you'll be unsurprised to know that Treasury, Cabinet Office and government departments care deeply about that level of expenditure. But immediately before I joined the NDA, I was involved in a project to set up something called the British Business Bank. I was working on that for about 4 years. And the British Business Bank you may or may not have heard of. It doesn't really matter if you haven't heard of it, because it's what's called, it's a wholesale financed institution. And what does that mean? It means that it is a provider of funding to financial organisations to help small businesses in the UK. So the British Business Bank was and still is the largest provider of venture capital funding to the UK. When I was there, I set up a scheme to corral together startup finance for businesses that couldn't get money from banks, because banks make decisions, as you probably know, on the basis of track record, so they're not very good with startup companies, because startup companies don't have a track record, so there's a kind of catch-22 situation in all of that. So I set up a scheme to corral together what the government was doing in startup businesses, and that's now lent £200 million to startup businesses across the UK and has helped, latest count, and I'm not involved in it anymore, so I can't take credit for the back end of this, but 40,000 companies set up new businesses. So when the opportunity came along to get involved and lead the socio-economics work for the NDA, I got quite excited about it, because actually it was kind of building on and going back to my roots from before. So if anyone after this wants to talk about loan guarantees, capital stacks within lending structures, junior mezzanine debt, any of these things, I'm here. Anyway, so moving sadly away from topic 1 to topic 2, just want to talk a little bit about the socio-economic impact of the NDA's work, or the decommissioning work done by all the business units, by all the site license companies. Under the Energy Act, we have an obligation to take due regard for the expenditure, for the impact of our activities across our sites. So we should really know what that is. The sites, is Professor Blowers here still? Good. Were rather pejoratively described as peripheral yesterday. But it is true that most of the NDA sites are in coastal communities. Many of them are quite remote from large conurbations, not all of them. So they do sort of, I kind of know what he's saying when we're talking about peripheral economies. Quick pop quiz. How much did the London Olympics cost to run? 12 billion, a little bit too high. Anyone else? 8 billion, 8.75 billion pounds. So Olympics, they get awarded every 4 years. How much money does the NDA spend on Sellafield over a 4-year period?
6.4 billion.
It's roughly 8 billion is where I was getting at. But, I'll lead you along. I know people haven't had breakfast yet, some of you. So when I go to West Cumbria, it doesn't feel to me that everyone thinks we've won the Olympics again, and we're winning it again, because every 4 years we're having an Olympic-like bit of expenditure in the country. But it's that order of magnitude. It's a tremendous impact, and of course, as a result, and Jamie, I think, may address this in a bit more detail, but as a result, obviously, the local economy is highly dependent in West Cumbria, is highly dependent on Sellafield's activities and has been for years. I'm not going to do this again because it didn't work very well, but coincidentally, the expenditure at Dounreay is exactly the same over 4 years as the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, but I haven't got any figures. I haven't got any figures for Magnox. But in the case of Dounreay, Tom, who's talking after me, will say a little bit about some of the exciting projects that are happening there. But again, there's a clear question of you can understand the dependency. The point about Magnox sites is they are slightly different. Obviously, they are big employers in quite remote communities. And although they don't have that big an impact on employment, at least in some of the areas, perhaps North Wales is slightly different. So I was reading, to prepare for this, Shepway Council's economic plan, and they pointed out that employment at Dungeness A, at peak, was around about 400 people. And within the economic zone, probably covered by Romney Marshes, employment is around about 10,000 people. So there isn't that level of dependency direct from employment. But because I'm that sort of person and I like doing my research, and I'm sure we've all done this, I was looking up business rate take by postcode on gov.uk yesterday. And Dungeness A still pays £90,000 in business rates per year that goes into Shepway. It pays £180,000, about half of that goes into Shepway. Dungeness B pays almost £1 million. So the impact from having a highly productive thing like a nuclear power station, just for a local authority, can't be underestimated. This is a big wodge of money. It's a technical term, which which clearly has a big impact on local government's ability to provide services and to provide a kind of healthy ecosystem. So turning on to children's toys, just as my last point, NDA in total, if you look at all the different budgets that we have across the SLC, spends around £20 million a year on socio-economics in one form or another. So that's the money not directly focused on decommissioning, but that's the money which is there either to help local communities, access decommissioning work, helps with skills and training, and some great examples of here in Cumbria, but also in Berkeley of what we've been doing in the area of skills, and also money when decommissioning comes to the end to help diversify the economy so that the local community is less dependent on decommissioning activity. And Tom, as I say, is going to talk about a really excellent project or excellent work that's happening up at Scrabster Harbour to give a bit of put a bit of flesh on the bones of those statements. Why children's toys? Because basically to help guide the work that we do on socio-economics, I think it's easy to think about LEGO. This is my acronym of choice. And LEGO stands for Local, Evidence, Governance and Outcomes. NDA social economic work cannot be top-down. We're not an economic development agency. Despite what I say about my qualifications, and I have some, I think there are 3 economists by background within the NDA. It isn't our area of specialisation, neither is it in Sellafield or Dounreay or everywhere else. We're working on decommissioning. So really, we need to align ourselves with local projects, local strategies, and see what we can do to work in a kind of far more bottom-up way rather than imposing what we think is the right outcomes on your communities. Secondly, I believe in an evidence base. I think we have a job to make sure that we are putting the money in the right areas and we're having a good impact. If you look at the 20 million that we spend overall, it's roughly in proportion to the areas of decommissioning. More goes in West Cumbria than in many other places. Within Magnox, the focus is on North Wales, which seems to make sense to me, but we need evidence to make sure that we're focusing the money in the right area. Governance, nothing riles me more than people talking about socio-economics as a handout or some way of a lubricant that somehow makes decision-making easier. This is taxpayers' money. We have a responsibility. We work for the taxpayer. It's your money. And if that means that projects need to be audited, if paperwork needs to be provided, we'll do it in a smart way, but we have to have the right governance to go with it. And then finally, outcomes. It's the most important thing. There's no point doing any projects if there aren't outcomes from it. That doesn't mean we can't take risk. It doesn't mean that projects can't fail. There's no point doing low-impact projects just because they're safe, but it means that over our portfolio, for the expenditure we have to see some sort of outcomes. Luckily, I've set this up nicely because Tom is going to talk about some projects with really, really interesting outcomes, which I hope are a good example of socio-economic projects. So I will hand over, I think via Bill, I've lost Bill, there you go, to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I must admit, in my 12 years at the NDA, I've never heard of socio-economic funding being called a lubricant before. That's fascinating. Before we move on to Tom, Andrew brazed a whole series of things. We could probably talk all morning just off the back of what Andrew was saying. But if there's anybody got a burning thing they want to ask Andrew now, there's one here. Have we got there we are. There's 2. There's David and then there's Penny.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I was just interested to hear the comment on how business rates are, put forward as a good socio-economic enabler for those local authorities when you consider that the appeal that the NDA put in is trying to reduce the amount of business rate it pays on its sites across the estate. It's resulted in Copeland Council having to pay back 26 million, which has took that council very close to having no reserves left. It's been very damaging for the forward plan of that local authority, and I think it was probably a really bad example to put forward. And I understand that the NDA will consider, going through rates appeals on a regular basis. I know it is demolishing buildings within sites, but I think it's had a massive impact on Copeland with having the Sellafield site within it. It also had us excluded from, there's local pool for rates throughout local authorities. Copeland was excluded from that because of the rate appeal by the NDA. So I think it's been more damaging than it has productive, so I wouldn't like it to be held up as a good example.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that's a point that was made, David, and I take the point that was made. And then Penny was going to be
On a positive note, I'd like to thank the NDA for all the support that we've been given for Berkeley College. I promise I won't mention skills ever again, because I've got what we needed and what we wanted, and it's oversubscribed and it's going well. So thank you, NDA, for their support.
Thank you, Penny. Yeah, I mean, we were actually really keen to have people from Berkeley College here for the 2 days to show, to promote that project and talk about it. But they're just so busy starting the first term and all the students coming. They just couldn't afford to send anybody here. So anyway, so. Yeah, Penny will talk the hind legs off a donkey about Berkeley College. Okay, thank you.